A solo player who does not own any minis is probably the last candidate to be purchasing and falling in love with Frostgrave, which is fantasy war games in the Frozen City by Joseph McCullough. This is a two-player rule book for fantasy skirmish games, and yet I saw this in a display at my local gaming store, and I started to flip through it, and I was captivated, first of all, by the concept of the frozen city and of the winter wasteland. Basically, winter and ice and snow are my favorite seasons, my favorite weather, and the concept of some environment that is a ruins in a sort of frozen land immediately drew me in. So I was drawn in really by the cover, and then as I began to look through it, the weight of it seemed to me perfect for somebody who has not played very much with minis rules. I did one video a little while ago, and I can put the link up here, using Songs of Blades and whatever. But I really haven't worked with minis rules very much, and yet they are exactly the kind of structure that is both flexible and has a foundation that can, I think, work well with the kind of hybrid DIY kind of game, adventure game that I like to put together. So I bought this and then started thinking immediately of my rune-bound Frozen Wastes, and in particular the inset game board. And I knew that I wanted to create a story within this world somehow, using the Frozen Wastes map and making a scale, which I'll talk about in a moment, and playing out in some fashion this Frostgrave with the Frostgrave basic rules. I started doing that, and then pretty soon I got sucked into, by myself, sucking myself into buying the Grimoire cards, because they offer, had made my own spell cards and printed them off, and they were fine, but this was really appealing because in this set you get not only all the spells from the basic rules, but you get the spells from all the expansions that are published to date, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to be buying some of the other expansions, and in any case I have all of these spells now to work with. So I started to do that, and what this video is going to do, the video is going to be basically in two parts. I've gotten some feedback from viewers that they like to see just sort of gameplay, and of course a lot of viewers also like to see the DIY part behind it. So the two parts of the video are going to be as follows. You can skip ahead to the next part, which is just going to show the game in action. I'll talk about the rules a teeny bit, but mostly I'll just go through and play part of the game. I'm in the middle of a game right now. And then the last part of the video, under the section DIY, or how I put this together, is going to walk you through the decisions that I made and the process that I went through to come up with the game that I am playing. So you can watch either, neither, whatever. I will say, as should be clear already, but to be explicit about it, I am absolutely playing with mostly the Frostgrave rules, but I am also adding on a lot to it. I am adding on, well, first of all, while I do have 2 wizards and 2 warbands, and there is some aspect of this that is just solo, playing both sides, which I usually don't do, I am in essence creating a solo game out of this, number one. And number two, I'm creating an environment that is alive and active beyond just having creatures coming in. So for example, you can see this thing here labeled the temple. We have a library here. We've got a living museum, and then off camera we have a mage tower. These are functioning and going to be alive and casting spells on people in a new phase of the game. That's the environment turn. So if you are interested in Frostgrave as it was written and as it is intended to be played as a 2-player skirmish war game, minis game, this is not the video for you. If you're interested in seeing how something can be developed into a different kind of story, how it can be played solo and this is probably going to be one part of a larger campaign, and the second part will move elsewhere off of this map. And if you're interested in seeing how I've created an environment that is brought into the Frostgrave rules, then this is the video for you. In the story of this game, the necromancer, who is this wizard here, and his apprentice and their soldiers are attempting to destroy the remnants of the world and basically send it all into dust. I am playing the chronomancer, and that is this character here, and this is my apprentice here. And what we are attempting to do with our soldiers and minions is to fight back against the necromancer's attempts to send this world into further ruin. And ultimately, if we are successful, we will be able to establish a home base here in the world and mount an assault basically on his crypt, which is represented over here, and in destroying that, move on with the riches and treasures that we get into the next part of the adventure. So this is part one of the adventure, at least as I'm playing it. I'm represented by these blue minis here, and as I said, this is the my wizard here, and my apprentice and my opposition wizard and the opposition apprentice, and they're in gray. What is going on in this world is there are the ruins of things like the library, there's a laboratory, and this is a temple. The thief, the necromancer's thief, has assaulted the temple, has gone into the ruins here and is just about to pick up some loot in this world. These loot tokens can be either traded at magical places for some random treasure, or they could be turned in for tokens that will allow you to do a reroll on a die. And these are the tokens, these luck stones. So you have an option as to what you're doing with the loot there. The dice here are representing an assault on, these are random ruins if they don't have any labeling, or specific ruins if they do. The environment itself, the environment itself can and does play against all characters in this game in the environment turn, and I'll show you how that happens. It is a frosted wasteland, and this strip of tiles here that represents coding to the various terrain is going to be rule picked up from Runebound, where the characters represented by the wizard are slowly succumbing to the weather that there is, and they will be getting these frost tokens that will eventually cause them to have some type of permanent injury. And if you want to know more about that, you can go to the DIY portion of the video. So the environment plays a role here, an active role, and the individual buildings also can activate with various spells that are attached to them, and the spells are up here to impact the players that are around them. And we just actually had an activation prior to this turn. We had an activation of this living museum here, but nobody, it was unsuccessfully cast. The spell was unsuccessfully cast. So that's a look at the overall setup and what is going on here. I've got a thief trying to get this treasure from the temple. One of my characters is in the has just climbed this ruin to pick up this treasure and is going to be coming down with it. And we also have somebody here who is about to come over to the what is this? The living museum to pick up both the treasure, and there is a discarded weapon there. The sequence of play in this game starts exactly as the regular Frostgrave does, which is with the initiative roll. In this game, I am represented by this sort of purple d20, and the necromancer is represented by the green. So we roll, and we see that we just by one got the initiative. So we will take the initiative, and basically what happens is, I'll show you up here again, it's quite similar to Frostgrave for the most part. We have the wizard phase, and so the wizard can activate. He could do a group activation if he has 3 soldiers or up to 3 soldiers within 3 inches. Again, all this is Frostgrave. They can take their actions, and the movement has to happen first, etc. Very much the rules of Frostgrave. Then they can have the Apprentice activation, any soldiers that didn't activate, and then after all of that, it's the environment phase, which will we basically roll on an environment chart that I created to see if anything happens. And finally, there would be the creature phase, if any, and then I have the upkeep phase. In the upkeep phase, we are keeping track of experience points that are gained and possibly doing any trade-ins in with the treasure tokens if we decide to do that. In this game, the experience points are accumulated as the game progresses, and you can possibly level up within the context of this game. That hasn't happened yet because I'm just sort of at the beginning, but I have decided that that will be happening. So I'm keeping a running track, and when 100 experience points are attained by somebody, they can do a requisite leveling up. What I want my wizard to do initially is to just simply move into getting line of sight to the Apprentice, because I want him to cast a spell on the Apprentice. Now, this building here, it's hard to see in the video. It's elevated a little bit, and this die is representing the fact that this guy is climbing up it. He made one move up it. The way I am envisioning this three-dimensionality, and again, I don't have proper terrain or anything, but is that the portion here that's sticking out, this is, you can walk under this. So the wizard is able to pass underneath it. Well, anybody's able to pass underneath it, but the core of it is where you cannot walk through, because that's where the building actually is, and that's where you would be climbing up. In any case, the wizard is going to be moving. He's got his 6 movement points. Now, if you want to know how I'm dealing with the terrain, there's a little difference here with the regular rules. You can look to the DIY portion, but basically he is able to move 1, 2, 3, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's going to be able to move right to here, and actually, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, he's going to be able to move. I'm going to leave him right there because he will run out of movement. So he's going to end up right here, and my building is collapsing a little bit. All right, I didn't really think this through enough when constructing it. But in any case, my wizard's moving here. He was only in base contact with this one character here who is a he's my infantryman, and this is the knight from the other warband, and he's going to move forward to have contact and initiate battle with the knight. And those are the only 2 characters that can move in this portion of the wizard phase of the group initiative, the group activation. So the wizard is now has line of sight to the opposition apprentice, and what he wants to do is cast a spell, and he's got 2 choices here that I'm trying to figure out which to do. I think he's going to go with Petrify. He's going to attempt Petrify. It's a roll of 12, but it would freeze the apprentice from the next turn, and I like that because that also prevents these 2 guys moving, at least in that next initial turn. The other option would be casting Elemental Bolt to try to do a shooting attack, but it's going to cost me 14 to cast that, or the casting amount is 14, and I don't think I'm gonna try to just do Petrify. So what we need to do is to roll our d12 and attempt to cast that spell. We'll just move over here and show you the entire roll, and we got it. We got a 14. Awesome. So we have successfully cast Petrify, and as mentioned, I'm keeping track of the spells that are cast successfully, and I will be marking that down and also indicating that the apprentice now during the next phase cannot take action because he's under that spell. The next thing we want to do is we want to have some battle here between my my infantryman, who's got a +3 fight, and the opposition knight, who has a +4. They are both at full health right now. So we're going to do the two rolls, and I said I have a +3, they have a +4, and we'll come back over here. As a reminder, I am rolling the purple die. And what did we, they rolled a 20. Not great. So they rolled a 20, and I have to look that rule up because it hasn't happened, but there is a rule that is a critical hit rule, so let me see what that means. Actually, as far as the rules go, the critical hit is only for the initiator, so that was a 20 in defense, so as far as I can tell from the rules, you can put a note if I'm wrong, it just means that this was defended. And now the choice is, and this is where the AI, such as it is, comes into play. What I have decided is that when the other side wins a round in battle, they have a 60% chance that they're going to determine to continue on. So I'm going to roll a D100 at this point to see whether the knight is going to opt to either push me back or to continue on. And I realize this is my 10, so I need to take that and replace it here, because I could have just used that one. In any case, we'll come back here and we will say, so if I get a 1 to 60, there's going to be another round. Otherwise, I will get pushed back. And we got 82. So we actually decide, rolled above, and we're going to get pushed back, and that is going to be the end of that battle. We get pushed back an inch. Each hex is 2 inches across, so you can travel. Each half of a hex is 1 inch. And in fact, despite the odds, that makes sense, because here is a treasure, and this knight is going to want to be able to pick that treasure up. And he's going to be able to do that now because it's this wizard's activation, and the knight can be activated with the wizard. I'm going to first and one point I made an error earlier when I said that my wizard was only could only activate 1. He could have also activated this archer here, but it's actually just all well and good that he didn't, because if this knight is still around, I want this archer to be taking a shot without any penalty for movement. So he's just there, but they're sort of both hovering over this treasure. But it is now the activation of the necromancer wizard, and what he's going to do first is he's going to try to cast his enchant armor spell, and it's going to take him 12 or greater to do it, but he's going to try to enchant the armor of the knight for the rest of the game, because the knight is really going to be one of his lead battlemen, and so he's going to attempt that right now. And we'll go to our dice box and give it a roll. He's going to do that on a 12 or greater, and he succeeds. So I have to mark down now that this knight is now wearing enchanted armor. And so now the knight can activate, and he's going to move, and then pick up this treasure, but that's going to bring him into base contact with this archer, so he's going to end up initiating a battle there after he picks up the treasure. So you'll note this little star that I put down here, and there is another one over here. There's one up here by the other wizard. This is just to remind me that I have moved and taken an action with that figure. It gets complicated when I'm filming. I get very confused, so that is just for my own memory. In any case, what's happening now is the knight is carrying a treasure, and so he's at a -1 fight, but he is base to base with this archer, so he's going to initiate a battle, and he will be coming with a fight value of 4 - 1, so a fight value of 3, and the archer's got a fight of 2, and we will see what happens here. He rolls a 17, and as opposed to the archer rolling only a 7, so that is going to be a big hit on the archer, probably taking him out and giving me an opportunity. The archer's got 10 health. Let's see, 17, 18, 19, that's a 20 versus 7 and 8, 9. So the archer is out. Now, this is giving me an opportunity to tell you how I am making damage and death work in this game. The way that this is happening is that nobody is going to die in this game. You're going to be knocked unconscious, which is what has just happened here. And when you're knocked unconscious, you get a couple things happen. You get experience points to your war band. That's a +5. And you also get then on that character to roll on the damage table, and I'll show you how this works. So what you do is you are rolling then, if you've been knocked unconscious, you're rolling on this table and following the table unless you roll a 1 or a 2. If you roll a 1 or a 2, you roll again, but you subtract a value of 1 from each roll until you get one of these rolls. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a roll to see whether we get a miraculous recovery or whether we get something else that is happening to this archer, and he has a miraculous recovery. So he's knocked unconscious. He would have lost any loot that he had. Any treasure would have gone to the victor, but unfortunately he didn't have anything. So the result of that is that he was knocked unconscious. He cannot take any further action for the next time he would be activated, but then he comes back. So I'll explain that in a little bit of a convoluted way, but the point is that I'm not playing with death in this scenario. I'm playing with a knockout that could then be resulting either in a permanent injury or a full recovery or something in between, but regardless, it means you are inactive for the next time you could be activated. Next up, it's the apprentice's turn, and remember, this apprentice is frozen and cannot act in this turn, and thereby he cannot do any group activation with these characters either. They will be able to activate in the soldier turn, but not right now. So I've got my apprentice here, and he's going to simply try to cast the an elemental bolt spell. He's going to have to roll. It's going to be tough because he's 12, 13, 14. He's going to have to roll 16 to do that. I don't really know. Nothing else we have. Let's see. Well, we could do a bone dart. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Maybe we'll do a bone dart. All right, we'll attempt bone dart. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We got to roll a 12 or better to do bone dart. So that's what we're going to do and hope for the best. We did not get it. And so now we're going to take some damage because we needed a 12 or better. We only rolled a 5. And based on the rules of spell casting, we are going to be taking, what did I say? We needed a 12, we got 7. We're going to be taking a damage here for that. So I need to mark that down on our apprentice sheet. His health has dropped, and that is really all that can happen. So he attempted, working in conjunction with his master to freeze this guy, and attempted a spell, but it failed, and that's, I guess, why he's an apprentice. A note, it looks like his thug is within range for an activation now, but he is not actually because he is in elevation, which counts as further distance away. He has climbed up to this thing, and actually he should have a treasure token, but in any case, he's climbed up there to get a treasure, and therefore he cannot be activated in this portion, and that concludes that portion because this apprentice can't activate either. In the soldier activation, the first thing is this thug has just enough movement to get into base contact with the apprentice, and he's going to initiate some hand-to-hand combat here. He's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 per my movement rules, and he's going to be standing right here with the apprentice, so he's going to move and he's going to engage him in combat. The thug has a fight value of 2, and the apprentice has a fight value of 0. So we'll be doing our rolls. There's no other modifiers in play, as far as I know. And again, we are rolling purple with a +2 with the green. Whoops. All right, got to re-roll that, both of that. Purple is us. Green is Are you serious right now? All right, obviously I'm trying here to use this. I don't know. Last effort. Us, them. I already forgot the modifiers. 2 and nothing, I guess. I mean, it serves me right. That was unsuccessful after all of that. Unsuccessful combat there with the apprentice. He thwarted us, and we have taken our action. The next thing that, and I will mark us as having done so at this point, there. And the next thing that needs to happen is we have this treasure. This is another archer who has climbed up this thing, is now going to make his way down. He's only got a movement of 3, so it's going to take him a couple turns to get down with that treasure. And we're going to do that. And ditto this, let's see, who else has the treasure on our side? This guy here also climbing down, and he is going to make it 1, 2, 3, also just about halfway. So the other 2 soldiers are going to start climbing down halfway, so I'll have to indicate that movement with some dice. And then the final guy here is climbing up. So he's already climbed up too. So basically, when they're not on the thing and there's a dice on the thing, it means they're climbing up. And when they're on the thing and the dice is off the thing, it means that indicates how far they've climbed down. It's a little messy, but it is what it is. So this guy is going to be, for his next turn, climbing up and for 1 action and taking this treasure for the next. And finally, we have our knight here, who has previously, in a previous turn, picked up this treasure here, and he is going to attempt to move to this magical place and trade it in. So he's going to be able to go, but his movement is halved. So what does he have? He's got nothing. He's got his armor, he's got his treasure, he's moving super slow, 2.5. This forest is 2, and he's basically just going to move to here, right closer to this archer, who's no doubt going to take a shot at him. This little ruin is unfortunately not blocking any line of sight or anything, so I imagine that is going to happen next. Of course, I think that completes the activation of the Chronomancer's side. Let me just mark that he has activated and confirm that, nope, we got 1. Yes, nope, we're done. So we're done here, and all that's left in this turn is to do the soldier activation for the necromancer. And since we're here, we might as well have this archer take his shot at my knight. Now, the soldier knight is, sorry, I keep calling him a knight. He's a man-at-arms, and he actually had a movement of 6, so I need to move him, 2, and then 3, so he can move 2 and a full 3. So he's got there to there with his treasure. Nevertheless, we are having the archer coming in with his +2 shooting value, and we have a value of a fight value of 3, so it's going to be 2 against 3, and let's just do that. Let's see, what did we get? We got a 20. We got a 20 in defense, and he got a 14. So we have warded off that shot on our our slow rush to the healing place where we can, the magical place where we can trade in this treasure for something. Excuse me. So he has now activated, and his shot did nothing. So we'll give him an activation token, and we have the thief. The thief is up here in the temple. He has previously picked up this bag of loot. This is gold. You can sort of see the token there. This is gold in the temple, and all he is going to do in his move is to move down off of this structure, and so he's got a move value of 7, so that's a move value of 3.5. So he's 3.5 down. I don't have a way of indicating that, but we will just say he's down 3. It's going to take him 1 more turn to get down there, and I need another d6 to indicate this. This is getting super, super confusing and messy, but that's the thief's activation. And next, see, this is why this is helpful, that he's already activated. All we have left are these 2 guys that have been stuck behind the apprentice, who was frozen in there by the spell. This is an archer as well, so he could take a shot, but these mountains are going to be blocking, are going to be counting as a minus, or I should say a +2 to the role of the defender in that. So I don't know that he's so keen on doing that. I think he, have to give this some thought. Because this guy's in the forest and there's also mountains in between them. I think he's just going to move. I think what he wants to do is, I think I'm going to have, sorry about that, I think I'm going to have this archer moving backwards and possibly ascending the mage tower. All right, I've given it some thought. This archer is really, he's kind of jammed up here behind his own apprentice. There's mountains here that are protecting the other apprentice. Climbing the mage tower to get the benefit of that is going to take too long. What he is, however, going to do is he's going to move back because he eventually is going to want to take a pot shot. He's going to have, he's going to be within range. There's going to be one benefit to the roll on the for this man-at-arms, but he's going to take a shot at this guy once this guy comes into the clearing here. So I'm going to have my for this turn, I'm going to have him do 2 movements, which will be a total of 9 because he's got a movement of 6 and then half of that. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. He's going to be able to move halfway through into the forest and sort of setting himself up to take some shots here. So that's going to be his activation, and we will give him the activated indicator. And then the last guy here, who is this? This is our treasure hunter. This is our treasure hunter, and, you know, he's going to go get some treasure. He's got a movement of 7. He's going to try to get into this museum. There's money here. There is a magical piece of armor here, so he could do 1, 2, 3, 4, and then he can go 5, 6, 7. He can go partially up there, so he's going to do that. He's not going to be quite up there yet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So he's partially up. He will get up there in the next turn, and I will give an indicator. Doesn't really matter how much I can see, but I know it'll be the next turn. So our treasure hunter is going for the treasure, and I think that is everybody activated. There's a lot going on here, and now we come to the next phase of the game, which is in my game, the environment's turn. So how does that work? Well, I created a table, and I will show you the table that I created here and discuss it just a little bit. This is the environment table, and you can see I've been readjusting it and working with it, but basically we're rolling a D100, we're rolling a D20, and either it's going to activate one of these buildings, and if that happens, I'll explain what happens, because each building has a spell that can attempt to be cast, and if somebody is within range of that spell, whichever side it is, they will suffer the effects of that. Or there will be a weather change if I roll a 1 to a 4. And what is the weather change? Well, the weather change is something I actually need to do in upkeep, and I will show you. It is the impact on the wizards and their soldiers of the weather, and that is indicated by the collection of these frost tokens, which can turn into white death tokens, which can result in permanent injury as the game progresses. And this is a rule largely taken and modified, but taken from the Runebound Frozen Wastes. And if you want to know more detail about it, you can watch that other portion of the video. But suffice it to say that wherever our wizard ends on, whatever type of terrain he ends on, so this is a Frozen Waste tile, he is going to collect 2 frost tokens based on this movable chart, and the other wizard here is going to be, well, he's on the same thing, so he's also going to collect 2, and we can see they're accruing them, they're accruing them here, and once they get the amount of their health, it turns into a skeleton, and then there's impact on that. So that's the result of the encroaching weather. So we're going to roll our d20 now to see what happens with the environment phase, and we rolled a 4. So indeed, what happens is the weather is going to change. And the way the weather changes is we remove this card. We were currently operating under the these conditions here. These are from Runebound Frozen Waste, and I'm only using them for this symbol here. And I flip over the next one and see that it has this star symbol, and the star symbol is going to be then coming in as the active weather strip here. And in fact, we can see based on that when we do the upkeep, in fact, we're each going to get 3 of those tokens instead of 2, because the weather has turned worse for us on these icy wastes. So that was the environment turn. And now we go to upkeep, and in upkeep, we're each getting, because we're on the same terrain, we're each getting 3 tokens for that. And this is representing our, as I said, our increased stress and strain from being in this kind of environment. And that concludes one turn. In a sense, I'm sorry that the environment turn ended the way it did, with basically a game mechanic from Runebound and not from Frostgrave, because one of the things, as I look at what I've done here, that I think was most successful is the idea of building up the environment, not only physically, but also in terms of actions that it can take. So that the library, for example, thematically, we didn't get to see this, but the library is protecting itself with a Furious Quill spell that it will attempt to cast, and then who's ever impacted around there can attempt to make a will roll to save, or else suffer the effects of that. And I really like this aspect of what I've done, I think the most probably of anything I've done, because it does reflect the concept behind the game that you are in the ruins of a magical city, and in this particular case, the theme or the idea behind the mechanic that I have created is that this city, that there's still traces of this magic left, and they're kind of inside the buildings, and when you are trying to assault the buildings or walk around the buildings, you will feel the effect of that. I think that worked really well. The challenge that and back to the Runebound aspect of it, I actually think the Runebound part of it is nice too. It's just not coming from Frostgrave, but this concept of the land itself and the weather basically impacting the soldiers on it in different ways, and sort of creating a slow time pressure to get things done. That actually integrates well too. Where I am struggling, and soon we're going to look more at my notes than the board here, where I am struggling with working this out, and I've shifted twice already, and I'm going to shift again to continue on after this video, is in how I'm using the terrain elements and the scale of the terrain. When I originally started making notes for doing this, as I said, the first thing that I thought of when I knew that I was going to buy this was this, the Runebound Frozen Wastes map, because I wanted a locale and I needed a place and I don't have terrain, blah, blah, blah. And so the first thing that I did is create this terrain chart keyed to the Runebound map, and gave different terrain modifiers and translated them into the movement that would cost per hex to get through it. This is this was different in my mind than distance. This was going to be the movement amounts to make some kind of sense. So if you were, for example, on a mountain tile, now obviously this is all abstracted because you're not walking through a mountain, but if you were on a movement tile or mountain tile, it was going to take you basically an entire movement of 6 to get just through half of it, and then another movement of 6 to get through the other half. I quickly realized this would not work because it translated into way too big a playing space and nothing was happening. Then I switched it in the game turn example that you saw for a couple of turns, where I basically had, following the Frostgrave concept of either rough ground or smooth ground, I had a key where certain tiles were considered rough and cost double movement, and those were ones like the mountain, and I think I had the forest. I can't find it in my notes right now, but and then the rest, like the tundra and the snowdrifts and the ice cracking, were smooth. I think the fjords were also too. Nobody ever went there, but just to simplify things. So that's worked a little bit better, but I still have the issue of the scale to deal with. And what I was working with here was that each hex basically was going to be 2 inches. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, for example. And I did this in part to simplify range and also to clarify where I am, and also to avoid having to use a ruler, because as you could see, I was struggling anyway with this terrible building that kept falling down, my living museum. Maybe appropriately, it's alive, so it keeps falling down, but not really knowing how effectively to work with all of this, and realizing that to some extent an approximation is okay. I'm not completely sure this is the best way to do it with this size map, and I am wondering whether I should simply have one square be an inch. Of course, these are larger than an inch. I don't have anything to measure right here. I probably did it at 3/4 to what it actually is. I don't think these are actually 2-inch hexes, but I could check on that. Anyway, I'm not completely sure that is working. So here, yeah, we can see. Can we see this? Yes, barely. A hex is like, it's like not quite 1.5 inches. So I don't know. I would welcome thoughts on this issue, because as I said, I don't have any significant experience at all working this way with this aspect of gaming, and I'm not sure. My goal is to make it maybe a little bit faster in essence, because what I want to do, or at least faster when you're holding a treasure. So for example, the combination of this guy with his treasure trying to get to this point of exchange, he's walking through what amounts to clear. So he could do that maybe in 2 turns. But if I had him in any significant type of terrain, it would be just taking a long time. Now maybe that is what is meant to be. And obviously I'm not playing this per the actual rules. My goal in one of my goals in creating this is to get to the treasure trade-in essence, because that is always fun, and rolling on the treasure tables is and seeing what you get is, at least for me, one of the most fun things of any of these kinds of things I do. And if you watch my channel enough, you know that I'm always creating situations where basically people pick up stuff and get stuff. I mean, that's for me, that's really fun. We didn't get to see how I would do this, but basically there's the general treasure table, and some of my little treasure tokens are actually, like this one right here is actually a picture of a gold, or I shouldn't say gold, but it's a picture of a bag, and I'll sort of show it to you. It's so small. This comes from Dungeon Saga. I will put up a list at the end of all the components I'm using here. So that would simply be some amount of gold that would get created and rolled on, and the rest could be a trade-in. There are also obviously individual situations where there's just the potion table. So for example, in the laboratory, which is right there, a treasure picked up there would be a potion, and I created a chart to indicate that certain structures had certain kinds of treasures. So additionally, you could go for getting a particular kind of treasure. So if you wanted to pick up a potion, you could do that and then do your roll and see what type of potion you got. Obviously, the spells and grimoires were in the library, and I don't remember the magic items and magic weapons obviously were up in the mage tower there, which you can't see right now. So I did do that a little bit. I don't remember if the Living Museum had anything in particular. I think that had just the general, you rolled on the general and got what you got. It also required remembering that I picked up something there because the tokens, I didn't bother to differentiate the tokens. I have a lot of different kinds of these, and I could have done that so that the ones on the ground were all one sort, so I would know. But I didn't get that far, and maybe I will continue on to refine the components that I'm using to make it clearer what's going on. Back of my play either, I found myself going back to the same spells, and that's something that I would like to revisit also. To I'm not really sure why that happened. I didn't spend a ton of time in spell selection in terms of thinking how they would mix together. I just chose some things that seemed interesting. I tried to choose the spells for the buildings. I tried to choose as thematic to what that type of building might have as best I could. For those of you who are still with me, I'm going to show you, just going to go through the notes that I have for what I did, because people are often asking me how I do these things and how it happens. And I already said, I think pretty clearly, that this all started with the concept of taking this setting, this idea, this rule set, and putting it onto that rune-bound map, and started very much with a focus on terrain, which I ended up not using at all. And this is what sort of became my modified much later. I wrote this down and proceeded, and then much later came back and decided I'm going to simplify it. So the tundra plains, the cracked ice were going to be 1. I didn't really assign snowdrift. I'll talk about that in a second. And the fjords, mountains, forest, and frozen waste were going to be 2. And the snowdrift, I toyed with this idea again of having some variability there, like maybe when you moved onto a snowdrift, you would roll a d6 and see if it was a high one or a low one. Of course, you could do that, but I didn't do that. It got to be too much. I think a lot of times when I think about these things, it seems like a good idea, and then when I put it all together, it gets to be a lot. I started, after the terrain, I started by choosing my wizards and warbands, and I chose the necromancer initially as my opponent, with the concept that I don't have a lot of minis, as I said, but what I do have, I have a bunch of zombies, and it seems like that's the thing in aggregate that I have the most. And I didn't realize initially, I thought I would need many more creatures than I ultimately did need. Well, as you could see, I failed to even roll for any, so I wanted to have the necromancer there. Again, not realizing even when I did this that the creature table is, I could have looked to see what the creatures would be, and here is the creature table. I had determined once I realized this that, and there's some skeletons and zombies, I could figure this out and get them in a ghoul, a bear. These are relatively generic. I probably have a lot of these things. I was going to just stick with the level 1 encounter. Where I was going to differ, you see here, they'll give an indication, well, there's 2 skeletons if you roll a 2, or there's 2 rats if you roll a 10. I wasn't going to do that. What I did was I pulled these monster tokens that I have from this is D&D Castle Ravenloft board game, and they're an indication here of a number. So that's 2 monsters, 1 monster. There's a couple of tiles in here, 0 monsters. I in the creature portion planned to say, okay, a creature's coming in. Then I was going to pull a tile and see, well, there's no monster, so you escape, and pull a tile to see how many monsters would come in once I rolled on the table. Or I should say, if I didn't get a 0, I would roll on the table, and if I had pulled a 1, it would just be 1 giant rat, or if I pulled a 2, it would be 2 of whatever it was, even if it was a snow leopard. I felt that was just an easy way of having a little bit more surprise and variability. That seemed like a very easy way to introduce that without a whole other rule or something like, the snowdrift roll that would be so easy to forget. I also started, I wrote this note story. This got filled in later. I want to have a bigger story in pretty much everything that I'm doing, whether or not I end up following through or whether I follow through later on. I keep these notes and could come back to it. This story had to do, once I knew that I was playing the I called him the Chronomaster. Is that what he's actually called? I'm not sure. That wizard versus the Necromancer. It was a question of going back in time in some way versus causing time or the effects of time that the Necromancer had done in terms of the decay. So that started to create a larger story in my mind. This is notes here from an abandoned idea about the frost giant. Once I started looking through the what they have in the back here in terms of the monsters coming in, I love giants, and I love this concept of this miscellaneous creature of the frost giant. Maybe he could be hiding out, and somehow the wizards could be searching for him. There is a mechanic in the Runebound Frozen Wastes where you gain cards that once you have enough cards and match them to a terrain, that's where you locate the princess. I thought, well, maybe I could have something coming into my game where, from the Runebound idea, where they're gaining these cards, and when they have enough cards, they locate, say, the Frost Giant and try to have some either combat with him or something to recruit him to their side, maybe take him to assault the crypt that was there. I didn't develop that. But that was an idea that I had, and could possibly still work. But I think, as with anything, I need to edit these things down and continue to hone them until I find something that actually works. That every idea can't be an idea in the thing. Following along with this idea, it was, and I mentioned this, the crypt that I had there, that was the base of the Necromancer. The concept would be that my character needed to somehow get in there, and maybe that's the access point to a dungeon, perhaps, if I continue on and buy another of these Frostgrave, the Breeding Pits one that has the dungeon rules, which I'm inclined to do, and then that could be the next chapter in this adventure. I noticed that I got excited when I saw the very, it's not even an actual table to roll on, but establishing a base and the base resources. It simply says, after you've participated in one or more games, you can simply declare what type of building your wizard is using for his base and choose one. And there are the location. You could be at an inn, and then you get benefits to that. You could be in a crypt. You could be in a treasury. This very simple information sparked my interest a lot, and it became a concept in my mind that my wandering tribe, after they successfully did whatever they needed to do vis-a-vis the Necromancer in this scenario, would then be able to establish a base. And as simple as this is, and it doesn't really come with a reward. I mean, some of your bases do, because you can, but it's not even a great reward. For example, if you're in the library, after each game, you can roll a die, and then on a 17 to 19, you find a random scroll, and on a 20, a random grimoire. I mean, that's not a huge incentive, but conceptually, or in terms of narratively, I should say, that gave me something. It gave me a goal, as simple as it was, and then the concept that you can buy some resources for your base. So that was something in my mind, even with the Frost Giant, which I abandoned, or in general. I think I mentioned that earlier on. This was my development of starting to develop the concept that the terrain, I first placed various unnamed terrain, and then I realized, no, I want to create more of a locale. So I started to give them names. I started to think what types of treasures could be in these things, and I mentioned this earlier, what would be in the library, what would be in the lab, there would be a mage tower, and I created these partially based on what the treasure tables had, and partially based on just what I wanted to be there. Initially, it's very light. I don't know if you can see it. Initially, I just had things like ruins of strongholds, just kind of generic strongholds, and those were various heights. Let's see. I questioned whether I should have some pick up and deliver mechanic for these treasures. I think this would work best if this were not, if I completely abandoned the concept of the other warband and simply had my characters in an environment where random things came out. And you could do this quite easily. You could sprout random soldiers as well as random beasts and things to fight. But having the pick up and deliver on top of everything that's already there, I think it would be too much for me to manage. It's certainly too much for me to manage on a video. Let's see. These were my notes just on the spells that I had chosen and reminder of what the various modifiers would be. So I put those on the spell card so I wouldn't forget the casting changes that had to occur with those. And this is sort of a list of things, bigger picture things I needed to work out, and I checked them off as I completed them. You can see here, I never fully checked off goals and story because that's still evolving in my mind, oddly, but it is. And the AI. The AI has been an issue from the beginning, whether I was just going to try to play two sides or whether I was going to try to create some rule set for the AI. And I did create some of these cards that I never used, and I only think I created these 5 in the end, that were going to be a draw deck to indicate whether the active player was going to go for the opposition farthest away, the most fight points, or the most exposed. I had this concept of their larger strategy would be assaulting a city or a leader or finding a treasure. I didn't use these at all. I didn't make very many. I made a few and tested them out, and it didn't really seem to work. So I abandoned that and just went with kind of what I generally don't like to do, which is in essence trying to manage both sides of the board. And for whatever reason, it worked in this instance, although I'm still not completely happy with how it came out. And I think the only way to really make it be where you're not managing both sides is to have something more traditional where one party is walking through an environment and then the environment just sends out individual creatures or even people that would then have a very strict flowchart of what they're looking to do. This is still, I would say, in process for me. Some other ideas I abandoned have to do with the cities that are on the map for the city hexes that are on the map for Runebound, and whether people could bring things to those cities or have things happen there, either trading or healing. The helmet and the campfire are icons from Runebound, and I was sort of toying with that. I still never worked out actually where and when you would take your money and trade that in. Maybe the money you collected would simply be at the end of the adventure. There were some other Runebound things that I didn't use. There were luckstones and flares that allowed, luckstones allowed rerolls and flares allowed movement. They're cool things, ultimately didn't really fit in here. Here's the weather notes that I made about, based on that Runebound system of the frost, which I like, and the White Death. So how the weather changes, we actually saw that happen. The accumulation of those frost tokens and then turning that over into a White Death counter, and then slowly you would start to succumb to those White Death counters and maybe get a permanent injury. That would be a level of something happening over time. It worked because the management of it could be very simply integrated into my own sequence of play, which is noted here. So at the very end, it's your upkeep, you tally your points and you convert your frost tokens. So since it was very much part of the sequence of play, I wouldn't forget to do it. Although, as you see, the creature turn, I did somehow forget that. The activation of the treasure, because I guess I just didn't note. I have it noted down here, the treasure rules to roll the d20. I just didn't do it. I did map out in advance of beginning. I counted up the hexes and saw how I could approximate with a D8 and a D12 roll and a D6. So I could just roll a D6, D8, and D12 once, and based on all of that, have the placement for any creature that was coming out. The Frostgrave rules tell you to just kind of place it in the middle. I didn't want to do that for a variety of reasons, but I had this. It was pretty easy to figure out. Of course, as I said, did not use it. Let's see. Some line of sight shooting modifiers I created, again, based on the intervening hexes. I tried to keep it simple. And this forests as a +3, I'm not sure. I don't think in my video I'm noticing now I even paid attention to that. Again, it became a lot to manage, especially when I was trying to do a video. I think what I would probably have to do to manage this better is just to create cards with all my various modifiers on it and have them laid out and be referring to them so I didn't forget anything. Let's see, anything else of interest? Again, this note on when to roll for the creature, didn't seem to remember that. More mapping out of, as I started to build up the environment, what the spells would be, what the treasures would be there, what the actual buildings, ruins would be. These are my notes for a campaign, possibly each of these representing a different locale. So we're here on the overland portion of it, and then this was back to that frost giant moving perhaps into assaulting the crypt, the dungeon portion, and then something else, or maybe just a dungeon here, goal, question mark. Again, very much a work in progress, but thinking about it in the longer term, because this is something that I want to continue to play out off camera in a different environment, using some more of the Frostgrave rules. Probably won't do a video again on it, but I think the dungeon rules and the dungeon experience, once I finish playing through this, will come pretty easily to me to do. And more notes on the AI. Again, never fully developed it. These were some of my ideas about who I could have them focusing on: the farthest away, the closest, the lowest health, the highest health, pretty obvious stuff, but I just did not develop that. And more on the story. The necromancer is seeking to complete the total destruction of the city of Felsted by continuing whatever the bad wizard did. He does this by unleashing his minions and trying to focus on destroying the remaining buildings and capturing the remaining treasure and magic that is there. And we are there to basically turn back time and to try to prevent that from happening. That was the basic story ultimately. And then I created my sequence of play with some notes about that, adding in my environment turn. And you can see here I have the goal, well, to establish a base and buy stuff for it. Why not? Talked about that. I showed you the environment table in the gameplay example. You can see here, as I mentioned, I was toying with the percentages here. I originally had them at 25% each, but I don't know. I think I don't know if I would change this more. The way this works out, something in the environment happens every time you roll. At one point I had nothing happening 25% of the time. Not really sure, but this worked out pretty well in terms of what I was attempting for it, which is to have the environment be static, have the environment be dynamic instead of static. And those are just notes on stopping the game. So that's a look inside the notes behind what I did. And as I said, it really all started with seeing this in the store, being captivated by the concept of winter, which always draws me in, and realizing that the weight of this rule set, which is, again, I'm not really familiar with minis, but I'm going to go out on a limb, obviously joking here, and say, the weight of this is relatively light, and yet it is robust enough to carry the weight of house rules and also to provide enough structure to play along with the game in a recognizable way. It was an instant, really an instant buy for me, and as I began thinking about how I would possibly manage to do it, I almost as instantly immediately thought of the Runebound map, and that being the way in which I could best approximate the feel of getting something like this with no minis and no no prospect really of buying any or painting any, which is a whole aspect to the hobby that I love to watch but don't see myself participating in.